On a cold winter evening in New York City, the streets were a symphony of chaos. Cars blared their horns in a frustrated chorus, and people, wrapped in thick coats, rushed home like scattered ants, their faces buried in scarves. In the middle of all this noise and motion, no one noticed the man sitting near the subway stairs. His name was Henry. Henry was homeless, not because he was lazy, and certainly not because he was weak. Life, in its cruel and unpredictable way, had taken everything from him. First, it was his job, a casualty of a corporate downsizing. Then, his family, a story too painful to revisit. And finally, the most devastating loss of all, his hope. That night, as the temperature continued to drop, Henry checked his pocket. His cold, trembling fingers found a single, crumpled dollar bill. $1, he whispered to the biting wind, his voice barely audible. This is all I have. He pictured a warm cup of coffee, the steam fogging up his glasses, the heat seeping into his frozen hands. It was a small comfort, but tonight it felt like a lifeline. The cold wind sliced through his thin, worn-out jacket, and his body shivered uncontrollably. Just as he was about to get up and head to the corner coffee stand, a figure stopped right in front of him. It was a young man. He looked sharp in his suit, but his face was a mask of panic and stress. "Sir," the young man began, his voice laced with desperation. "I know this sounds strange, but I lost my wallet. I need just $1 to take the subway. I have a really important interview tomorrow morning, and I can't miss it." Henry looked up from the cracked pavement. All day, the world had treated him like he was invisible. People had walked past, around, and over him, their eyes fixed on their destinations, never once meeting his. But now, someone was actually speaking to him. Someone was asking him for help. Henry's gaze fell to the dollar bill, still clutched in his hand. This was his last chance for warmth tonight, his last chance to feel something other than the gnawing cold. For a brief moment, he hesitated. The world had never been kind to him, so why should he be kind to it? But then, he looked back at the young man's desperate eyes, and something shifted inside him. He slowly, deliberately, cracked a small smile. "Son," Henry said, his voice soft but steady. "Take it." The young man's eyes widened in disbelief. "Are you serious? You're giving me your last dollar?" Henry simply nodded. "Money comes and goes," he said, the words feeling truer than anything he had said in years. "Kindness stays." The young man took the dollar, his own hands now shaking, but not from the cold. It was emotion, gratitude. "Thank you," he stammered, looking at Henry as if he were an angel. "Thank you so much. I'll never forget this." And with that, he turned and disappeared into the swallowing mouth of the subway station, joining the river of commuters. Henry watched him go. That night, Henry slept on the cold concrete, his stomach empty and his body shivering. But for the first time in a long time, his heart was at peace. 5 years later, New York City had transformed. It was brighter, faster, and unapologetically richer. The skyline was dotted with new, gleaming skyscrapers that pierced the clouds. But down on the streets, some things hadn't changed. Henry was still there. Only now, he was older, thinner, and the spark of hope that had flickered 5 years ago was almost extinguished. He was just... One sunny afternoon, Henry sat outside a fancy cafe, holding a piece of cardboard with a simple plea written in faded marker. Any help is a blessing. People walked by, some dropping a few coins, most ignoring him completely. Suddenly, a sleek, black, luxury car pulled up to the curb, the kind of car that usually only appears in movies. A well-dressed businessman stepped out, his shoes polished to a mirror shine. He was talking on his phone, but then he stopped He froze, his eyes fixed on Henry. The businessman hung up the call and walked closer, his expression a mixture of shock and recognition. "Sir, is it really you?" he asked, his voice filled with a strange reverence. Henry looked up, confused. He saw so many faces every day. They all blended into one. But this man's smile, it was familiar. It was a smile he remembered from a cold winter night. "It's me," the man said, his voice trembling slightly. The subway guy. Henry's eyes widened. It couldn't be. The stressed, panicked young man from 5 years ago was now this confident, successful figure standing before him. The man, whose name was David, explained everything. That interview he was so desperate to get to, este italiano. It led to a great job. That job was a stepping stone to promotions, to bigger opportunities, and eventually, to him starting his own company, a company that was now worth millions of dollars. But, David said, crouching down to be at eye level with Henry, through all of it, I never forgot that night. I never forgot the kindness of a man who had nothing, but gave me everything he had. Tears began to well up in Henry's eyes, blurring the image of the man in front of him. David gently took Henry's rough, weathered hands in his own. Today, he said with a voice full of conviction, it's my turn to give back. This was a new beginning. Henry was given a warm home, a place to call his own. He received medical care that tended to the years of neglect, and David gave him a job at his company not out of pity, but out of respect. He gave Henry back his dignity. Months later, at a company event, Henry stood on a small stage. He was no longer the tired, invisible man on the street. He was clean, healthy, and his eyes shone with a renewed purpose. He looked out at the audience, cleared his throat, and said one simple sentence that silenced the entire room. I was never rich in money, but I was always rich in heart. For a moment, there was complete silence. Then, the entire room rose to their feet, and the sound of applause thundered through the hall. It was a standing ovation, not just for the man on the stage, but for the power of a single act of kindness. Sometimes, the smallest, most insignificant act of kindness can create the biggest miracle. And sometimes, your last dollar, the one you think means nothing, can become someone else's first step toward their dreams. Kindness is a currency that never loses its value. Thank you for watching. If this story touched you, please like, share, and subscribe for more content that inspires.